Hi, the incident I'll be talking about is between my stepmom, her biological daughter, and me. I, 25F, have been living with my stepmother, Mary 45F, since I was 5. My biological mom was an alcoholic and extremely abusive to me. My dad, fed up with her behavior, filed for divorce and demanded full custody of me due to her negligence. Unfortunately, her issues couldn't be proved in court, so both my parents shared mutual custody, with my mother having me most days. But her ignorant behavior soon caught up with her when one day, she left me home alone, and I accidentally got access to the balcony. My neighbors noticed and called Child Protective Services on her. From then on, I started living with my dad. Things were tough at first, but once he met Mary, they changed for the better. Mary was my dad's lawyer's assistant. They met during the divorce proceedings and got into a relationship soon after that. Mary was herself a divorcee and had a daughter, Jane, who was 2 years younger than me. Jane suffered from a neurological condition and was in a wheelchair permanently. The disease also affected her mentally, as she had learning disabilities. I met Mary and Jane when I was 4. At first, it was a bit awkward because I had been pretty closed off to strangers due to my biological mother, but Mary understood my situation and took things slow, helping me to open up more with time. I grew extremely close to both her and Jane in a matter of weeks, and that's when my dad decided to marry her. Their wedding, as far as I remember, was very personal, with only my grandparents and Mary's parents present. I used to call her Mary before the wedding, but I've called her Mom ever since. Things started to get better for us from that point on, as Mary opened her own practice and my dad, who was a construction worker, opened a construction company. Soon, his business boomed, and from that point on, we never faced a day of adversity in financial terms. Both Jane and I went to the best schools and had good lives. I always considered Jane my sibling, helping her with whatever she needed and standing up for her whenever necessary. Even Mary felt like the only mother I had since childhood because she had always been there for me. I have been extremely grateful to her all my life because she was the reason I was alive and thriving, and I have never failed to show it to her. We moved to a much better neighborhood when I started high school, and that's where I met my boyfriend, Ryan. Ryan lived 2 blocks down and was my classmate. We started going to school together once we realized we were from the same area and became good friends. He used to visit my house quite often and got along well with everyone, especially Jane. He was one of the few people she was comfortable around, and we all had a lot of fun together. By the end of last year, he asked me out, and I said yes. When I told my family about this, everyone seemed happy, except for Jane. From that day on, Jane frequently became irritated with me, and we didn't talk much. Mary saw Jane's behavior and blamed it on her recent medication change. I understood and decided not to talk to her much to avoid fights and give her stress. So, Ryan and I applied to many colleges, and we fortunately got into the same one, which was a pretty good school. Everyone was overjoyed at our achievement, and Ryan and I couldn't be happier. Jane was still kind of distant with me, so I decided to talk to her before I left and sort it all out because, after all, she was family. After talking for hours, I realized, by the way she talked about Ryan, that she had a crush on him. Everything made sense, but I wasn't going to trade my boyfriend to sort things out, so I decided not to touch the topic at all. Jane and I got to okay terms before I left, and I was satisfied with that. Before I left, I told Mary how I thought Jane had a crush on Ryan and that it might make sense for her to ask Jane about it so that it wouldn't create further issues between us. She assured me that she'd take care of it and let me know that I always had her support. I got emotional at the thought of leaving my mom, and we both cried a little in the kitchen. A few weeks after this talk, I left with Ryan to go and set up my college dorm room. The next 4 years were great academically. I learned a lot, was a topper in most subjects, and bagged a few internships before my peers. I was overall doing well. My relationship with Ryan, on the other hand, wasn't at its best. We had been having issues since the beginning of college and were on and off for most of the time. I also heard a few rumors that he had cheated on me, so by the end of college, our relationship was pretty much hanging by a thread our history. We both mutually decided that we should take a break for some time to gather ourselves together. I went back home to take a break after my degree for a few months and told my parents about the breakup. They weren't as surprised as I had thought, but that didn't seem fishy. Jane was also about to finish high school and asked if I could get Ryan to talk to her because she was planning on adopting the same major and needed guidance. I was a little hesitant about calling Ryan so soon after our breakup and suggested some of my friends from the same major, but she insisted she wanted to talk to Ryan only, so I decided to keep my feelings aside for Jane and texted him. After talking to her, Ryan called me and let me know that Jane was being extremely flirtatious during the call and that he wasn't interested in her like that. I told Mary about it, and she said that it shouldn't be an issue for me because Ryan and I were broken up. I didn't think much of it after that. A few years later, Jane was about to complete college, and I was working, still staying at my parents' house. I bumped into Ryan while grocery shopping, and he was doing well, settled, and enjoying life. We got to talking and met again a few times for lunches and brunches. We eventually ended up rekindling our relationship, and a few months into it, he asked me to marry him, to which I obviously said yes. The news of our relationship wasn't welcomed as expected by Mary, and Jane's disdain was understandable too, but it was the news of my engagement that wreaked havoc at my house. Jane threw a huge tantrum, which led to her having an anxiety attack, and she was taken to the ER. She was fine, but due to her predispositions, the doctors asked us to take good care of her and not introduce any stress. After discussing it with Mary and my dad, we decided that it was best for me to move out. I moved out soon after the incident and used to come home on weekends. Jane had now made peace with my engagement and was pretty excited about the wedding. She was originally going to be my maid of honor, but after her reaction to the engagement news, I decided to let her be a bridesmaid. Everything was going well, with everyone, especially Mary, who was trying to be a part of every small detail of my wedding and was also paying for half of it. I couldn't have been more thankful to her for everything and even mentioned it in my rehearsal dinner speech, 2 days before my wedding. On the night of my rehearsal dinner, everyone was drunk beyond measure, and Mary asked if she could talk to me in private. I thought it was going to be a mother-daughter catharsis, so I suggested we both talk in my room. I hadn't expected what was about to go down. So, Mary sat me down and began telling me how grateful she was to have a child like me, making me emotional. She continued that she had similar wishes for Jane, but that was a far stretch, and began to cry. I consoled her, and she asked me if I loved her. I said yes. Then she asked if I owed my life to her. It was an absurd question, but I answered with a yes again. Upon hearing this, she stood up and asked me for a favor. When I asked what it was, she said that since I owed her everything I had, she wanted me to share a little of it with my sister, Jane. I was confused and asked what she wanted me to share. What she said next was way beyond normal. She said that I, in comparison to Jane, had a way better life, whereas she was surrounded only by a few, one of whom was Ryan. She claimed that she had known about Jane's attraction towards Ryan since childhood but didn't do anything about it until we broke up after college. She continued that Ryan was a very understanding man and perfect for Jane. She asked me to break my engagement with Ryan and ask him to marry Jane instead. I couldn't believe what I heard and asked her to shut up, but she didn't. She said that this was the only way I could pay my dues to her, as she had accepted me as her own blood and taken care of me like her own child. She said she wished for Jane to have a relationship for the future too, and Ryan was the one guy she was sure wouldn't break her girl's heart. She knew Ryan wasn't interested in Jane like that, which was why she wanted me to convince him. I couldn't process what was happening and in a fit of rage, kicked her out of my room, with her yelling that I should consider it, and she'd be indebted to me for life if I did this one thing for her daughter. Her yelling attracted some attention, and my dad came, asking me what was up. I didn't answer and just locked him and Mary out. I cried in my room and didn't realize when I had fallen asleep. The next day, I woke up late and was asked by my dad to visit him in his room. Mary was there, with swollen eyes from crying. He said that what I did last night wasn't cool and that treating Mary, the woman who raised me, like that and kicking her out wasn't something I should have done. I realized at that point that he knew nothing about what Mary had asked of me. As I was about to tell him, Mary held my hand tightly, signaling me not to tell the truth. I shrugged off her hand, and before I could say anything, we heard a scream from Jane's room. She had fallen in the bathroom and had cuts on her legs. We didn't have enough first aid, so my dad decided to take her to the ER as soon as possible and discuss the issue with me and Mary later. Mary, from that point on, has been pleading with me not to tell my dad the truth and cause harm to her relationship. I don't wish to engage in conversation with her and have been sitting in my room. Wibta if I don't give Mary another chance to explain herself or apologize before I tell my dad about what she asked of me. Update 1. Hi, thank you everyone for such a kind response. I did initially realize that Mary was at fault, but I doubted myself after my father tried to intervene. I have also decided to take advice from the comments and will be telling Ryan first, before my father. Also, some people have been asking how I wasn't aware of her intentions beforehand when I knew Jane had a crush on Ryan. The thing is, everyone, including Ryan, thought it was an innocent crush and nothing more. There wasn't a time when Ryan had reciprocated Jane's feelings through actions or words. But I think I should have been more careful with the cues because one thing that I now think of as weird is that during my dress shopping, Mary also decided to get Jane a wedding dress, to fulfill her wish of seeing both her daughters in wedding dresses, as it might have been difficult for Jane to find a husband due to her condition and people's unwarranted prejudices. Regarding Jane, she was fine with some cuts on her legs that were taken care of well. She had no idea about what Mary had asked of me, and honestly, I didn't know how she would react once she got to know. Anyway, when I went to see Jane after she was back, I saw Mary standing in the corner, her face turning pale. As soon as I called my dad, I had to ask for car keys to visit Ryan. Mary fainted on the spot, thinking I might rat her out. I helped her to the bed, and Dad decided to stay beside her, silently blaming her condition on me. I didn't have time to explain anything to him and immediately left after taking the keys to the car. I am writing this part after I have met Ryan, so I went and asked Ryan to meet me in my car to avoid unwanted attention. He realized from my voice that it was serious and came down rushing. I told him everything that had happened last night and made him aware of the fact that maybe Jane's little crush wasn't so little after all. He was more shocked than I was because he had respected Mary a lot for being an excellent woman and such a caring mother to me. He said that such a big revelation would lead to a lot of unpacking, so the best option would be to stall the wedding for a few weeks. He made it very clear that no matter what happens, he has my back and is willing to elope if that's what it takes to be with me. He wanted to be there while I told my dad about this, but I asked him not to, as it was a family matter first. He agreed and asked me to call him immediately after I was done telling, and meanwhile, he would announce to his side of the guests that the wedding was going to be postponed due to some personal issues. As happy as I was to have someone like Ryan around me, I was still scared because this whole scenario could lead to sour relationships with my dad, who had always been there for me since day one. I had already lost a mother yesterday and was not up for losing a dad as well. Update 2. So, a lot went down after the last update. I gathered all the courage I could and went back to tell my father about it. Mary opened the door and let me in, but she didn't look as stressed as before. I entered the room and saw my dad sitting on the bed with Jane lying down. He looked angry and asked me to take a seat. He told me that he knew what had gone down last night and was extremely disappointed in me. I asked him what he was talking about, and he told me that Mary had told him how I berated her last night, saying that she wasn't my real mother and that Jane wasn't family, so I didn't wish to have them at the wedding. According to my dad, when Mary tried to calm me down, I told her that I didn't want her disabled daughter spoiling my wedding pictures. I couldn't believe how cunning Mary was. I tried to tell my dad the truth about her, which he was duly shocked by, but he said that this was a case of my words against Mary's words, and there was no way for him to believe either version as the truth, so maybe we should sort it out for now. Jane was constantly saying how her mom's side of the story was correct, and now I was sure that Mary had told her daughter the truth and asked her to play along. I very clearly told my dad that the wedding had been postponed because I didn't care who he thought was telling the truth, but it was absolutely unacceptable to me to have someone who had tried to emotionally manipulate me into giving up the love of my life. Mary intervened and quickly said that she wanted to apologize if she had done anything wrong while raising me and wished for our relationship to get a second chance by being a part of my wedding. My dad was also insisting that I move on and let the wedding happen smoothly because a lot of money had been spent, but I decided not to pay heed to their requests and moved out that very day. I left to stay at Ryan's house, and it has been 2 days since then. I didn't really have the energy to deal with anything, so I turned my social media accounts off. I haven't been contacted by my dad and Mary so far, but I've been getting calls from some relatives, which I didn't answer, assuming they must be regarding the cancellation of the wedding. Things are pretty stressful right now, and I hope I find a way to sort things out soon. Update 3. This update comes a week after the last one when the wedding was postponed, and I left my parents' house. So, a week after the constant calls, I got to hear from Ryan, who was friends with my dad on Facebook, that he had put up a post about me on his wall. Apparently, after our relatives had tried to find out the reason for the wedding cancellation from me and got no answers, they decided to bug my dad and Mary about it. They had tried to contact me to at least make a public announcement as a family, but after they couldn't get in touch with me, he made that post. He mentioned in that post how he, Mary, and Jane were begging me not to ruin their reputation over petty family issues and respond to them because talking was the only way out of this. This post did more damage to the already messed up situation with our relatives, and all his friends on Facebook were now speculating about the problem and spreading rumors. The worst one I heard was that I had stolen money for the wedding and then cheated on Ryan. Ryan was getting stressed about all this, and I talked to him, thinking that he might get cold feet, but to my surprise, he again assured me that he was going to marry me irrespective of whatever came our way. I still hadn't responded to the post and was going to talk to my parents, a day after the post, to at least be rational before the big confrontation, but things took a different route. That same evening, I got a call from my grandma, my biological mom's mother. I hadn't mentioned her before because she wasn't relevant to the incident, but she has been an important part of my life. She has always protected me and saved me from my mother and had even helped my dad financially. She usually didn't involve herself in our matters, but her intervening in this incident meant something big had happened. Apparently, she had gotten wind of everything and directly confronted my father about it. He told her what he believed was true, Mary's version. Grandma trusted me and felt something was fishy, so she decided to talk to me about it next. She told me she knew how much I loved Mary and Jane, and there was no way I would have considered them not my family. I got emotional at the possibility of someone from my family finally believing my side and told my grandma everything. She said she couldn't believe how vile Mary was and how I was saved from her ill intentions due to her being under the influence. I told her how I feared losing my dad, and she asked me to talk to my parents first while she tried to find a solution. The next day, I decided to go back to my house and talk to my parents. I was blamed over and again for making a spectacle of our family. I was honestly done with them within just a few minutes and asked if I could have a moment alone with Mary. We went to the other room, and I asked why she was doing this to me when all my life, I had loved her. She said that whatever she had said was something she had been feeling and never wished to burden it on me. She asked me to forget about it all as a mistake and move on from it. I said that her losing control and asking so much of me wasn't acceptable at any cost, and I was going to stand by the truth no matter what, which led to her warning me of the consequences. Hearing this, I went outside and asked my dad one last time if he would even be willing to believe my version of what Mary had asked of me. He said what I was blaming Mary for was very serious, and it wasn't possible for him to believe something so vile about the woman he had loved for so many years. He couldn't believe his own blood, but anyway, I had gotten my answer, and I stormed out of their house. The next thing I hear is that they have been telling people that I have abandoned them, so they were going no contact with me as well. I knew my grandma must be up to something, so Ryan and I will be visiting her in her country home this weekend. Update 4, I'll start this update with some good news. Once Ryan and I reached my grandma's beautiful house, she suggested that since my parents had created such a messy situation, we should consider eloping and getting married in her backyard instead. Ryan thought of it as a good idea and called his folks to ask for permission. They were very happy about us getting married, so the next day, my grandma called her local priest, and Ryan and I were married. He announced the news to everyone via his Facebook. The post did get a few comments, but we decided to check them out once we were back home. My dad and Mary had also seen the post and recognized the background, so they began bombarding my grandma's phone with calls and texts. My grandma replied back to my parents, who were acting so desperately, and reminded them that they were the ones who had gone badmouthing me, so they shouldn't be surprised by this now, and ended the conversation. After the event, I told my grandma what happened at my parents' house and asked if she had planned to do anything. She asked me what I wanted, and I told her very clearly that after Mary's so-called threat, I wished to expose her in front of my dad, assuming Jane already knew what her mother was up to. My grandma then revealed the plan to me. She said she had this huge chunk of alimony money from her divorce back in the day, and she would spread the news saying that she was going to give all that money to me to start a fresh life after my parents had abandoned me. According to her judgment, she was sure that my dad and Mary would both want a share of the money, and she'd pretend to give it to them if Mary confessed, saying that she had evidence otherwise because I had accidentally called her that night. I was married to the man I loved and had a family with my grandma, so I had nothing to lose and decided to give this a shot. The next day, my grandma called my dad and let him know that she was going to give me her money because they had cut contact with me. Just as she expected, they were shocked and wanted to talk in person, so my dad, Mary, and Jane were at my grandma's house the next evening. They congratulated me and Ryan, but nothing much happened after that. My grandma had decided to have a talk with them the next day. As everyone was done with dinner, Mary asked if we could talk privately. She began talking about how my life was finally at peace with me getting married without the drama and with all this new money. I asked her what her purpose for the private conversation was because I didn't wish to engage with her unnecessarily. She said that whatever she had done that night was extremely inappropriate. I asked her to say what she did because I wanted her to feel ashamed of herself after spoiling my dynamic with my father and maybe Jane. She apologized very clearly for asking me to leave Ryan and convince him to marry Jane instead. She continued, saying it was all her motherly instinct, and that is, yet again, the reason we were having this talk. I expected her to say something along the lines of how I was her daughter too and how she felt remorse and wanted to make amends by telling the truth. To the contrary, she told me that the kind of money I had now could help Jane settle and get a better future. I didn't cut her off and let her continue. She kept trying to convince me to give half the money I had to Jane because I could earn more, whereas life was already tougher for Jane, and now, with the love of her life married to me, this was the least I could do for her. I didn't say anything to her and began looking at the kitchen door behind her. I don't know how, but it must have been God's will, that halfway through the conversation, my dad had come looking for us, and he decided to stay quiet and listen to what Mary was saying. She didn't realize he was right behind her because she was too busy explaining herself to me. As soon as I looked at my dad after she was done, she realized he had been there the whole while, and what a blunder she had committed. Mary tried to cover up whatever was said during the conversation and instead revealed a lot more about how she had known all this while and was doing this all for Jane. My dad immediately called Jane and asked her if she knew about all this. Looking at the stressful situation, she realized it was best for her to tell the truth. My dad turned towards me and began apologizing for not believing me in the first place and told Mary and Jane to leave the house as soon as they could the next morning because he had a lot to think about. Mary tried pleading, citing Jane's condition, but Dad wasn't willing to hear anything. I asked my dad to go and rest in his room because this was a lot to take in. Ryan escorted Dad, whereas Mary and Jane decided to stay in another room, at least until they left. No one offered them any sympathy, and we could tell Mary had seen it coming. I cried that night thinking about how bad things had gotten and how we were a happy family just a few months ago. Ryan consoled me, saying that he was going to be my real family from now on. The next day, Mary and Jane left, and my dad left 2 days later, after apologizing to me a lot for not trusting me in the first place. I told him that his doubt about me might have hurt our relationship and that we should take it slow from now on. He looked dejected but agreed to give me some space. Ryan and I also left the same day, thanking my grandma for all she had done for me. I asked her to come and stay at my place for a while, and she might visit next summer. Update 5, since a lot of you have been asking about what happened with my dad and Mary, I'm here writing this update 4 months later. So my dad decided to divorce Mary but still wanted to stay in Jane's life if she wished, which Mary denied. Mary had tried a lot to win him back, but it didn't work. She never apologized to me for everything she had put me through. Her justification was that whatever she had done was for her child, and hence it was okay. I was just happy that I wouldn't have to deal with her anymore.